Hello everyone. I hope everyone is doing well and still healthy. Welcome back to one more episode of the KLANG webinars. We already did quite a few in the last 2 weeks about with several topics, and today is a new topic, KLANG app. I want to give you all a full walkthrough through the centerpiece, basically, of the whole KLANG world. So KLANG app is the one that is controlling everything, controlling the audio. And our idea when we designed this app was to make it intuitive, simple, clean, and not scary, especially when it's used by musicians, so it doesn't look too overcrowded with everything. But still, you will see when we go through everything that it is quite powerful, and it gives us quite a bit of flexibility for all kinds of use cases, no matter if it's a personal monitoring system or used by a monitor engineer to work with the musicians, right? So as a quick introduction, let's talk about how we can apply the app and our system in general. So no matter if we're using a Fabric, like I have in here, or a KLANG vier or DMI KLANG, we can use it as a standalone monitoring device for any kind of situation, any kind of mixing board, with sending just inputs into our Fabric, sending the mixes out either to a KLANG Quelle or using the analog outputs or whichever format, and going to our RF or whichever output device we want to use. And we can connect a control device with our app on it directly to the network port of our KLANG device. KLANG app is available for iPad, iPhone, Mac, PC, and Android. So, of course, we can also use it as a personal monitoring device where each musician can control their own mix. Same situation that I just showed you here, but instead of just connecting one device directly to the network port of KLANG, we're connecting a Wi-Fi router. And that one can be connected to all the control devices. Of course, we also have the possibility for a full workflow integration with the Digico SD and Quantum range. For details on that, please tune in when we do the next console integration webinar, where we go through all the details on that. So the Wi-Fi connection, just to round that up a little bit, is quite simple. And on the back of each of our devices, there is a network port. That one we connect to our Wi-Fi router, and that one goes to whichever control devices we want to use in that. The KLANG devices, as well as all of your control devices, like a computer, iPad, or something, can respond to DHCP. That means you don't need to set up any fixed IPs or something. As soon as we are in the same network, KLANG app will discover the connected devices and give you access to that. When we start up the app, we can choose between 4 modes. For now, we're going to work in the admin mode, which gives us access to everything. And later, we will take a look at the 3 other modes and what is special about those. Always visible are 3 sections, no matter in which screen we are working. We always see the possibility to go to the stage, the fader view, the metering, and to the configuration part. We also can always have access to all the mixes that are available in our system. That will be the top row of the app. And we see the master fader of the selected mix that we are working on right now. Okay, let's switch over to the live view. So this is my app that we are working with right now. Let's start with the faders. At first glance, it looks like pretty much any mixing app, any mixing board. We can see faders, we have mutes, and we have solos. So as simple as that. What was very important for us was to have a very clear color coding, name tags, and little icons that we can use. The reason for that is that, especially in a personal monitoring situation, when the musicians are in the orchestra pit or on stage and they're controlling their own mixes, they have a lot of things to do. They ideally should play well. So we want to give them as little distractions as possible. And one of the distractions that we see a lot of times when we visit productions is if there's any like little personal monitoring box. The musicians have to find the right button and then rotary and find, okay, I have to do this, and while this I have to hold something else. Until they have figured out where the channel and the volume button is, they already missed some of their cues. So with KLANG, due to the color coding and the icons and the name tags, it just takes one glance and you know exactly where you are. That is quite helpful. When we solo and mute, you can also see that we get a little indicator here that we can see again from every screen. So, for example, if a musician would solo accidentally a channel and not hear what he needs to hear, there's always this indication here, hey, take a look, one channel is soloed or another channel is muted. In case it is soloed, the only thing we have to tell them is, hey, look at that clear solo button, and suddenly everything is there again. Very simple. Another interesting feature that we built into this would be, let's say we are in the guitarist mix, okay? And the guitarist, like any guitarist, is already here at maximum with his guitar. And now the guitarist is requesting more level on his guitar. That is usually a problem. In this case, the musician can just do the intuitive thing and just try what happens if he presses that plus button up there. As you can see, all the other levels are going down, the master volume is going up, so the guitar goes to 11. So it is an easy way for musicians not to run into problems with gain structure. It's completely intuitive when it comes to that. Okay. We can also zoom this view. Those are those little glasses icons here. The screen can fit, of course, as many channels as you want. 64, for example, if you're using a DMI KLANG. But if your fingers are not tiny enough, you can also zoom them to adjust it to the screen size of your device or to your liking. So in this case, we could just scroll through all the faders in here. Okay. There's also this little button here, second function Alt. If we press that, you can see that the solo and mute buttons are turning into P and E buttons. The E button is the edit button. So we can get directly into naming and coloring and icons. We'll take a closer look to that screen in a little bit. And the P button would just guide us directly to the positioning for just that channel. Okay, so we see only the position of the guitar in this case. All right, so a second mixing view that we have access to would be accessible when we press the faders button again. Then we get to the group view. Let's go here where we have a little bit more groups. So those groups represent 1 to 16 DCA groups. They can have completely different channels going into the groups or being assigned to those groups between every mix. So every musician can customize that as much as they want it to, or as much as you, as the admin or as the technical director or front of house engineer would allow them, right? This is something that a lot of people are using during the shows, when they just need to adjust the balance between those groups. Speaking of balance, in the fader view, we have absolute levels. So turning up a level by 2 dB will make it 2 dB louder. In the group view, we have a relative mixing. Relative mixing means if I increase the level of the vocal channels, for example, you can see that the rest is going down, and vice versa. The reason behind that is that musicians usually think in louder. So if you do soundcheck with a musician, they will always tell you, okay, I need more kick, I need more bass, I need more guitar, more keys, more vocals, and so on. And the overall volume will just raise and raise and raise on their ears, which can be quite dangerous, especially if it's a slow increase of that, because our brain or our ears will adjust to that and get used to that, so we won't even feel how much volume we are blasting directly in our ears. A great remedy for that is just working in balances between those groups, because if I increase one channel, it will decrease the level of the other ones. So we're just working in balances between those groups, and we're not running into the situation that we're slowly increasing the whole volume of everything. Okay. If we click on or tap on one of those, we get directly to the faders. In this case, oops. Here we go. We're back. All right, so those are the groups, right? Let's move to the stage view. That's where we do all the binaural magic and the positioning, and we can place all the signals all around us. For some background on that, on what we can do and how it changes the way that we're mixing and which advantages that gives us, I invite you to take a look at our next binaural basics webinar, where we talk especially about that. Okay, so this is what we call the orbit view. It's basically a top-down view on your head. If we take a signal, let's for example take the guitar, and we put it somewhere inside this circle, it will be in stereo, right? So there's no 3D as long as we are inside this circle. That can be handy if we don't want any processing, any alteration of the signal for this musician. We just put it in there and it will just go straight through without any changes in sound or behavior. Once we place a signal on that circle around us in here, we can place it on a horizontal plane around us. All right. And if we press this stage button again, we get to the elevation view. Oh, I can see that there's a question coming in. Sorry. Oh, and Christoph Genix. Hey, buddy, how are you doing? There was a question over there from Leila Hansen. Oh, that's nice. That is coming from Leila, saying that she loved using KLANG on the Partial Facsimile tour. That is fantastic to hear. Awesome. Thank you. No, I thought there was a question. I probably missed it. If not, we will get into that again at the end of this webinar, where there will be plenty of times for all kinds of questions. All right. So we just switched from our orbit view to the elevation view. The elevation view gives us the possibility to move signals not only around us, but also above us and below us. And like this, we can access every angle around us. Let me show you how this is built up. So this horizontal center line here represents the level of our head. Here would be my left ear, and this would be my right ear. And this point, as well as this point, are exactly behind me. So those 2 points would meet behind my head. So just imagine you would be folding the screen around your head so they meet in the back of you. And then, of course, if we move signals above us here, that is above our head, and all that is below our head level. All right. By the way, if there would be signals placed in stereo, they will not appear in here. So the guitar is just not here right now, because it makes sense if you think about it, because that view is just an externalized view. So only signals that are outside of our head will show up in here. Signals left in stereo will still be in the middle. All right. You can also see in this view as well as in the elevation view that we see the groups that we have assigned in here. But in this case, they're just there to clean up our view, especially when we're working with a lot of inputs. Let's say we're working not like in my case with 24 or something. If we're using 40 inputs or 50 inputs, it can get a little bit crowded. And if we just select one of those groups, it will only show me and let me move the members of that group. The other ones I can still see, but I cannot move them by accident. That makes it quite fast to work with. Also, you can see this grayed out solo link function here. If I solo a channel or several channels, they will also be highlighted in here, and I can only move those solo channels, which is great for fine-tuning. Let's clear that. And then, of course, there's the select link, which you saw already before. If I use the second function and go directly to the positioning from our mixing view, that's the only signal that is highlighted in there, and the only one that is shown. Another little detail that you might have noticed is that once we press that Alt button, or the second function button, we get a grid. So without that, we can just move the signals to exactly whichever point we want. If we press this button, it will snap to a grid, also in here. Okay, so this is great if we just want to reproduce a certain position exactly, or if we want to center something exactly. That is that. All right, so, and those are the two screens that we would be working in most of the time. And you can see they're clean as much as they can be, right? There's the metering. It's not very groundbreaking, but it's very important to have. So you can see all the inputs that can come in and all the outputs. The inputs are pre-fader and pre-EQ in case we're using the EQs in our KLANG devices. The outputs are post-fader and post-EQ. So that's actually the volume and the level that is going out of the unit to whichever format we're choosing to send it to. Let's go to the configuration screen. So there are several tabs in here. Let's start with the connect screen. The connect screen shows us first all of the devices, all the KLANG devices that are in the network. In my case, that is one DMI KLANG and one KLANG Fabrik. And of course, we see the demo mode. The demo mode is also what you can use to play around with it if you download the app on your device. So I absolutely would invite you to do that later in case you don't have it yet. And you can sit on your couch tonight, connect some headphones, use the multi-tracks that we included into the demo version in there, and you can just play around and just recreate and find everything that you are seeing in this webinar. There's a quick question coming in from Zeke. Which KLANG device are you using now with the SD11? The DMI KLANG would that be? Or basically I'm using both with them. I just have to switch between them. But in this webinar, I'm not even using my SD11 in here because we're just working on the KLANG app. There's another question coming in. How can you replicate your panning in multiple mixes? That is easy. I will show you that when we go to the preset screen, because that's what we can use for that. Perfect. Okay, so first we can see all the mixes available. We see the devices available. We can change the name for that mix if we want to. We can change the icon. So right now we have a saxophone icon for the vocal mix. That is of course very, very wrong. Let's pick that one. So we have an icon in there. There's the possibility to phase invert the whole mix, which is something that quite a few engineers are doing. Not everyone is doing it, but sometimes it can make sense to invert the sound in there, so the in-ear sound blends better with the noise around us, which would be the PA or wedges on stage or the drums on stage. So it might be worth it to just play around with that and just see, hey, is that better or not? It's just 2 positions, so that's easy to do. If we are using an iPad or an iPhone, for example, we can use the device's motion tracker to make some signals interactive in that. And that's basically this screen. Except, oh wait, there's one section that I'm covering with myself. So directly below me here, we can see the local IPs, which are the IP addresses on our control device. In this case, that is my computer, which has 2 network adapters, and I can see the IP addresses for both of them. Another interesting point is this weird little number in here. That is what's called a device ID. That's a unique ID for my device in here. And this is important. So this might be important for some of you users. In some theater and church applications, for example, when there are, let's say, 15 iPads and there is an update. It could be an iOS update, it could be a KLANG update or something. What a lot of people are doing is that they update one device, then they back it up via iTunes, and then they push that back up on all the other devices, which can be faster than just doing it individually with every device, depending on the workflow and depending on what is on the device in there. If you would do that, this device ID would be copied to all the other control devices. And that would mean that Klangfabrik would not know which iPad is controlling what. In case you do that, you should just press this tiny, tiny little refresh button, and you can see I'm getting a new device ID. And now it is completely separate again. Give me 1 second. I think there's a few questions coming in. So Lee is asking, I've only been able to find 1 demo track. If you could elaborate on how to find other tracks defaults to the jazz tune. Yeah, we are just providing 1 multi-track in there. That has to do with all the difficulties of being able to just work around with the copyright. Sorry, I'm losing my English right now. So we own the rights for the track that we are providing there. But there is a possibility to enter your own multi-tracks in that. You can check that out on our blog. If my colleague Marcus is in the chat, I think he would be. Marcus, if you could just drop the link to the blog section where it is about adding new multi-tracks. There's one question from Federico. Hello, when I move the signal in the elevation view and I come back to the 360 mode, I find them in a different position. I would not be aware of that actually. So wait, you move something in the elevation view, so let's move the kick over here. And now it's here. If I move it back here, it is exactly there again. So I wouldn't be aware of that. If you suspect that there's a bug or whatever is confusing you, always just get in touch with support@klang.com. We're always happy and as fast as possible to help you with that. All right. Okay, so I think those were the questions that were here. In case I missed something, again, we have some time later to go through all the other details, right? Okay, so that was our connect screen. Let's go to the channel screen. Here we can see all our input channels, and those little shorter ones over here are our groups, right? So we didn't see the naming, we see the icon, we see a little representation of that. We see filter and tune. We'll get back to that later. We can adjust the input patching in here. So basically we can swap two inputs. We can stereo link channels. So for example, my overheads are stereo linked. I can also unlink them, then they're separate, or I can relink them. I can also turn on and off channels, which is quite interesting because that can be completely separate between each mix. So you can be very selective in which signals you give your musicians on stage to work and play with. A quick example would be, for example, that our singer doesn't like the percussion player. So we turn that off, and now on the faders you can see that the percussion channel has disappeared, but all the other musicians are still seeing that percussion channel. But a more realistic application for that would be, for example, the click. So only the drummer would get the click and the rest wouldn't even see that. Or you can distribute talkback channels to only the relevant people, and they won't be bothered with any that they anyways won't need or use. If we click on the name over here, we get to the naming view and the editing view. Here we can type in a name up here. We can select icons, we can select a color, and we can assign a channel directly to a different group. And then you see on the lower part here, quick labels and smart labels. The quick labels are preset by us, and they are changing depending on the icon. All right. So for example, the kick will have 4 different variations of a kick writing. So other than typing every name in, you can just go icon, tab, next, icon, tab, next. That makes the setup very, very fast. The smart labels are learning whatever you typed in there. So if you have a singer with a, let's call her Maria, and you don't want to type Maria all the time in there for every different mix or for every setup that you're doing. So once you type that in, let's call the kick drum Maria, you can see that it pops up here with the smart label. And now I realize, okay, no, my kick drum is not called Maria, so let's move that over here again and call it kick in, right? So we can do the same naming functions for the groups as well, of course. So names, quick labels, smart labels, colors, icons, and we can assign the color that we choose for the group to all the members of the group, which makes it again very fast to have a clean and clean view and a good overview of everything. All right. Let me see if I missed something in here. Oh yeah, a little trick that you might or might not know. So when we're labeling something, and I'm not sure exactly if what is on my patch list is actually the same that I'm hearing, and I want to just listen into that channel exactly. I can just press and hold this big icon over here, and when I do that, that channel is soloed temporarily. Can make it pretty fast to to identify channels. Another little trick would be that there are some key commands that we can use if we're working on a Mac or a PC. On a Mac, for example, one very useful one would be Command and arrow to the right, which would let me go through all the different inputs. Okay. On a PC, that would be Control and then the arrow keys. All right. So. And then, of course, you see here in the lower part of that screen the copy functions. And that is probably one of the questions that came earlier. So how can I place the same panning to another channel? This is one option how we can do that. So if we copy this user and then go to a different user and paste it, it will just duplicate the same settings, including the levels and the panning and everything to the other one. If I press paste this to all users, then it will copy whatever I just copied to all the mixes in my system. If I'm using a cascaded system, so multiple units, even to all the mixes on the other units in there. If we already did sound check, so I just want to rename something or recolor something, and I want to push that to all the other mixes without changing the levels and the positions, I can use the paste meta to all users function, which will only copy the channel and the group names. It will copy the icons and the colors, the activation of a channel, as well as the stereo links. It will not touch the channel order, the group membership, the fader position, mutes, solos, and the binaural panning position. I just saw there's a question coming in, how do I create a new input group? Great question, I nearly forgot about that. So if we scroll down to the last group that we have in here, you can see there's a little plus and minus button. So if I press plus, I'm getting one more group. If I realize I don't need that many groups, I can just press the minus and it will be gone. All right, so that's that from this screen. Let's move over to the preset menu. Up here, you can see show files. So that contains all the information in the whole unit. Okay. If I open this drop-down menu in here, I get several sections. I get local, which is the memory on my KLANG device. So this is in this case, the show files that I have stored on my DMI KLANG. If I would have a USB stick connected with KLANG show files on it, that would show up under USB. Remote is my control computer, or it could be my iPad, whichever device I'm using right now. So those are the show files that are stored over there. And then of course I can import a preset, which would just open my Finder or Explorer or whatever it's called on iOS, where I can just import stuff from Dropbox or wherever we are using that. All right. So if I select a show file like this one, I can save it, I can load it, I can delete it. And if I press transfer, what happens is that this show file that is on our internal memory of this KLANG device will be copied both to USB as well as to my control device. In this case, it would be my computer, which is a great way to interchange files between several units. So for example, I'm on tour, I have my computer with me, my iPad with me, and I'm putting KLANG on my rider. So I'm today in Germany, tomorrow I'm in France, visiting Christophe, and I'm getting a KLANG unit from the local production company there. By having the show file copied over to my computer, it's just one push of a button to just push that over to the new unit. Let me show you a little trick with that. If we just load it here, it will just load the whole state of the unit except the routing and the clocking information. However, if I want to do that, I can just press and hold this button for a few seconds, and then it will also load the routing, will also notify me of doing that. Okay, so that would be that. And of course I can select any file from the remote section, which is on my control device again, press transfer, and that will push it over to my internal memory. Another thing I can do with those remote files is press here. So the save button has suddenly turned into an export button, which will open my Finder in this case because I'm using a Mac. So I can just save that on any location on my computer easily. If it's on an iPad, I will also have access to iCloud and Dropbox and whatever I'm using there to interchange files. Within each show file, I can use up to 100 snapshots. To take a snapshot, it's like take a picture. Okay, so I take a snapshot, I take more and take one more, and I can have different song by song based changes in here. The snapshot contain the position of my signals around my head. They contain level, mute, solo. So basically just the mix information. I also have the possibility to rename it and update it and move through my list in here. I can also use the previous and next buttons. And you see those actually in every screen down here. So without having to leave my fader or my orbit view, I can go to the next snapshot. We have a mix recall save. So if I'm changing positions between or levels between songs, but let's say my bassist doesn't like that, I can recall save his mix, and he will be protected from whichever changes I'm doing with the snapshots in here. I can also recall save the master volume and the stage mode. The stage mode would be mono, stereo, or 3D globally for that mix. We can also recall save individual channels. We can recall save the position of the channels, the channel volume, and the mutes and solos. And that comes back to the question before. So if we only want to adjust the panning, for example, for somebody, we can just recall save everything except for this one here. And that would just copy it over. All right. So that is that part. Let me see if I missed something. No. One thing I wanted to show you before we go to the other screens in here would be the EQ function in KLANG. DMI KLANG is a tool that is designed to be working with mixing boards, mostly with digital boards, of course. In Fabric, we can also activate EQs. Those EQs that we build into the devices are not meant to be operated by a sound engineer. Sound engineers, we usually have our tools and channel strips in our mixing boards or wherever we want to do that. These EQs are meant to be operated by musicians. So musicians usually, or most of the musicians that I know, don't really know how to get to a great result fast with a parametric EQ. So we wanted to simplify that. So our approach to that is to use a preset-based EQ. So for example, let's pick the kick drum preset, and I can tune that. So I have my EQ curve that you can see over here, and I have only one control. This control can increase the intensity of the EQ, or flatten it out, or even invert the intensity of the EQ. But on top of that, it can tune the whole EQ. Because if you think about it, most engineers would do relatively similar things to a kick drum, but some of the variables in there are the tuning of the kick drum and the whole size of that, and sometimes the room acoustics and all that stuff. So what we would do is adjust the frequencies where the EQ is actually gripping, and those can be actually adjusted relatively to each other. The cool thing for a musician is that they can just, instead of just thinking about all the frequencies, Qs and gains, they just move around until it sounds nice and they just leave it there. Can't get simpler than that. All right, let's go back to my DMI. So we just went through channels and presets. Let's go to the info screen. The info screen is showing us some maintenance info. So that is showing us the software version that we're running, so that's firmware on the unit. We can see the configuration, we can see the serial number, the IP addresses in here. That is interesting that we see two. I will get back to that in a sec. The MAC address. We can see the processing load that is in here, which might be interesting in some cases, especially if you need to talk to us and we have some specific questions. You see here the net latency. Very important, this is not the audio latency, this is just a network latency, so that's a control latency. So between moving a fader and the audio engine actually doing that, there would be a 1 millisecond delay in this case here, which you will never feel, of course. You can also see that here we have a little green N indicator, right? So that shows us the network health. It is green because our network is working perfectly. If my network would get under a lot of stress and there might be an issue, or especially if I'm using Wi-Fi and the quality of the Wi-Fi is not good enough to get all the information in there, and there would be some package losses. So some information that would be transferred between control device and unit might be affected by that. This N light would turn yellow, and I would see that in every screen again. So that is a very good indicator that I might have to take a look at my network setup. In case the network would actually fail, like the cable is pulled out or whatever is happening, then that light would turn red. And that would notify me that we're losing so much information that we cannot operate the unit properly from here. So again, stuff can go wrong, especially when there's several devices included in here. But in this case, we can always see what is wrong, and that just shows us the way to go to fix it. Power supply, that is more interesting when we're looking at Fabric, because Fabric, for example, has two redundant power supplies, and because I'm a lazy ass, I didn't connect the second one, but you can see that on the first one everything is fine. And then of course the audio modules, again with DMI that is not so interesting because there are not so many options, because it's very simple. In a Fabric I could see, for example, that we are clocked and ready at 48K with the clock source being MADI. The MADI format is 64 channels. There are 0 MADI errors, which is interesting because, for example, a broken cable outside of the unit could create MADI errors. So if you should see this number rising, you would probably should take a look at a cable outside. So this even gives me an indication on things that are outside of my KLANG device. So can make troubleshooting quite easy. Copy log to email, copy log to USB. Copy log to email in case you would run into an issue or a question and you're not sure if everything is working how it should be working. You can just copy that log, paste that into an email, send that over to us, and we can take a look at it and we can tell you everything's fine, or hey, you might have to take a look at your clock setting or whatever. Copy log to USB does pretty much the same thing. It copies to an USB. Handy is that it's also doing a full backup of your whole unit. So all your show files would also be backed. So that's a quick way to just, take your unit to the next unit. Then we have the set button here, which is for advanced settings. You can set a unit name. Standard would be that the serial number would be in here, but I can also call it fill because it's my unit. If we want to cascade multiple units, we do that through the naming. So what we would do if I would have two Fabrics, for example, I would call the first Fabric fill bracket 1 and the second one fill bracket 2. And then it would be automatically recognized as one big unit, and I would have access to all the mixes at the same time. I can copy mixes between both units. I can queue into all the mixes on all the units. Show files and snapshots are loaded and stored simultaneously on all the cascaded units. So basically, as I mentioned, it's behaving like one big unit. To just illustrate that, let's go over here. So that's what we would do with the cascaded unit. So two Fabrics in here. In this case, it's called Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. And the four mixes on the left side of that little line would be from the first unit, and the other mixes would be from the second unit. But it would behave, again, like one big one. Let's go back to my screen in here. Set a fixed IP. Only do that if you have a good reason for it. We always have to do that disclaimer. Because in most cases you will be totally fine with the DHCP server. That will just make your life much easier. But if you need to set a fixed IP, that is where you would do that. And now that brings me to why we are seeing two IP addresses up here. Because I'm using a fixed IP in this case, because I needed that for my console connection. Once I set a fixed IP, it will open a second virtual network port that will still respond to DHCP or as a self-assign IP in this case, which is really handy if I, for example, forget my device IP, which can lock me out of other devices very easily. In this case, the device will always respond to a connected DHCP server and we always have access to the device. So again, makes it very easy in case there's a screw up somewhere. We have different fader gain settings that we can assign. The standard would be 0 dB, so all our faders go up until 0, including the master volume. So minus infinity to 0. If we need some more bang, you get a free 6 dB with this button. So you can go up 6 dB across the 0 dB, also with the master volume. And then we have this setting in here, the 10 dB, 0 dB setting, which is automatically set when we're in connection with the digital console, because that would match the faders of the console. So it goes up to 10 dB in there. Other than that, if you're not using it with a integrated console, like a digital console, you can just choose whatever works best for you. Gives you some possibilities. You can turn off the demo mode in case you saw that and heard that and you don't want to check that out again. You can reset the MADI error counters in case you repaired your MADI cable that I mentioned before, and you're fine again, and then it will just drop the error counters to 0. Be careful, that would give you a small dropout of around half a second in the MADI stream while it's resetting the error counters. So don't do that during a show. And then factory reset, in case you're very brave, do that directly before the show, or better don't. And verbose logging is basically just an increased logging. Only turn that on when we ask you to do so, in case we're looking for something. Okay? All right. So that is the info screen. By the way, one more thing, you see also this little green C light here. That's a clock light. So that just notifies me that we're clocked and everything is fine. If we would lose our clock, that would turn red. So from every screen, we are aware that there's an issue with my clock. Cool. And then we have the external control screen. So the first thing that we can do in here is change the skin of the app. That was wished by some of our theater clients because it has to be dark in the orchestra pit and they felt that the purple lighting was too present. So we introduced the possibility to just darken the app so it can be used in a high contrast mode without a lot of backlight and there's not a lot of colors going around. Again, that's all your preference in there. We have the MCU connection. So if we have a Mackie Control Universal compatible DAW controller, we can connect that to remote control our app, which is really nice. So we can have some faders in there. We can swap through the mixes, mute, solos. We can also fire, recall snapshots directly from there. We will go into detail with that in another webinar. But that's a cool function to get some faders on that, which basically works for the admin view, so what a monitor engineer could be using, but it could also be used in a personal mode where one musician just prefers to have faders, so that's an easy way to get that into that. And for the D-Live users or the Allen Heath users amongst you, the D-Live boards also have an MCU compatible MIDI layer. So that can also be used as a remote control. That is not the same thing as the Digico integration, which is a really deep workflow integration in all the details. With the MCU, you get a fader control for some haptic feeling though. And then the mixing console link, that is the digital connection. Again, we won't go into details with that. There are different webinars where we can see all the details on that. All right. So those are the tabs that we see with DMI KLANG. With KLANG vier, let me switch over to that. It looks a little bit different because there we have a routing option in there. So we can choose between optical inputs and Dante inputs. And if we go to Fabrique, which I have in here again, we even get two new tabs in the configuration in here. One would be the system tab, where we can choose the clock speed mode. So if we want to work with 48K, 96K, or if we want to use 48K with equal EQs, which I showed you before. And then we can change the I/O scaling on Fabrique. Again, this is a Fabrique exclusive feature where we can go up to 56 inputs with 3 mixes, or we can choose to use 32 inputs and 6 mixes, or in a personal monitoring application, for example, 16 inputs, which would give me 12 mixes out of one unit. So it's just an I/O trade-off, and here is where you adjust that. To change that, you just need to press and hold this restart button here, which just restarts the unit with the new I/O settings. This one is an interesting one. MADI port 2 of KLANG Fabrique can be turned into a second input. So we, instead of having a MADI input and a MADI output, we could have 2 separate inputs, which can either be used for conversion capabilities, or it can be used to get the full channel count at 96K. All right, so we have that. And we are really short on time. I was talking too much. I apologize for that. Okay, so one feature that I still wanted to show you is the queuing function. We have 2 different queuing options in our devices. One would be the musician queue, which looks like a little iPad up here. And that gives me the possibility to mirror one mix to another. Okay, that can be really handy, for example, if I'm a front of house engineer and the band is more or less self-sufficient. So they are mixing themselves on stage, all right? Of course, I can have an iPad beside me at front of house and still help them a little bit whenever they need help. But a cooler version of that would be, let's say the drummer of this band is the musical director. And he knows a little bit about mixing because he has a home studio and he has seen a fader up close at one point in his life. And let's say the guitarist needs help with his mix, right? What the drummer can do now is press this button, so his mix turns purple. So far nothing has changed. But now if the drummer is selecting the guitarist's mix, you can see here, Q from 4. So now the drummer is hearing the guitarist's mix, and he can go there and help him and say, you know what, you need that, and because I'm awesome, you need more kick drum. All right? And then once that's done, he just goes back to his own mix. So he solved a problem that usually would probably involve the guitarist shouting for the front of house engineer to run through the venue and help him. In this case, the drummer could do that without even leaving his drum chair. So again, that is mirroring one mix to another. Another function would be the queuing function, the engineer queue function, which would be that one here, which is more similar to a queuing function in the mixing boards that you know, where there is a separate solo path that will just tap in all the mixes and play that out on an output. For details on that, check out our blog again. Just search in there for the queue function. There's a detailed instruction on how you can set that up. If there should be questions with that, we can probably do that in a separate webinar in a little bit more detail, in case that's interesting. Let us know in the comments. We are always very, very curious what you think and what we can do to educate you or help you or discuss ideas. So those are the functions that we can control with KLANG app. And now some of you might ask, hey, do we want to give that level of access to the musicians on stage? Probably not. So, and that's why we have several app modes, okay? So, if we go to the config button and we press and hold that for a few seconds, that's where we get the choice between the 4 modes. Admin mode gives me access to everything, like I have shown you now. I can do everything in there. If I select the show mode, that will lock me out of any system settings. I still have access to all the mixes, but system settings are locked, which is great if you don't trust yourself and you think you might do something by accident, or in a more realistic scenario, if you want to give an iPad to a tech on the side of the stage so he can support the musicians every now and then. That would be great for the show mode. Then we have the musician mode. The musician mode lets the mix selection up here disappear. So we're locked in one mix. In this case, we're locked in the drummer's mix. If I press on the faders, I first get into the simplified mixing view, but of course I still have access to the faders in case I want to work with some more details. And of course, the drummer can adjust his positions, his elevations, and so on. But that's it. So no distractions, no accidental mixing in the wrong mix or something like that. So that makes it very easy and intuitive for the musicians. There's also a 4th mode, which is the personal mode. It's very similar to the musician mode. So we're locked in one mix. We can see the faders, the groups, the orbit, and the elevation. But on top of that, we can rename, recolor, reorder, and regroup our channels. So for example, if the drummer doesn't like the bassist, we can just call him stupid. Okay? So now the drummer sees the bassist as stupid, and every time he looks at that, he gets a little chuckle out of it, and the mood on the stage is really good. If we switch to another mix, the bassist, for example, will still see himself as a bassist. So the peace in the band is still maintained, which is very important. And on top of that, we get local shows. They look very much like the global snapshots and show files that I showed you before, but in this case, they are stored, recalled, and fired directly from my control device. So for example, from the iPad of the drummer. So if the drummer likes his mix and he knows that he will go on vacation now for 2 weeks, and somebody else will fill in for him, he can just store his own setting. So awesome drum mix, right? So we store that in here. So the drummer goes, somebody else plays there, might change a lot of things in the mix, but the drummer comes back, connects his control device and loads the awesome drum mix, and everything is as it used to be before. Also, the drummer is able to take his own snapshots. So if he doesn't like how the global snapshots are adjusted between the songs, he can just go and say, no, I just want my snapshot. And if he recalls his snapshot or any of his snapshots, look what happens. It just adjusts all the levels, right? So, and on Fabric and Vier, it would also recall save that mix automatically. So, that's that. And of course, the external control, as I mentioned, the MCU possibility would give us access to connecting a little fader box, so the drummer doesn't have to use his iPad alone, but he can also use a fader on that. In reality, I have to be honest, this is not used too much because a touchscreen has a lot of advantages with that. But in case you have a couple of those musicians who prefer haptic control, that's the way to go for it. Okay, so that was our walkthrough. I hope I didn't forget anything, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. Let's move over to questions. Let me see if I can see any questions coming in here. Give me a second. So some of them we have answered already. snapshots are different per user or mix, Ricardo. I think that question came in before I showed the user snapshots. So the global snapshots, so that would be these here. So in the admin view where I can see that, those are global for all the mixes. If we have a cascaded system with multiple devices, that would also be for all the mixes in all the devices. However, if we want to if we want to have a snapshot just for one user, we do that from the personal mode. Let's see, there's a question from Vanshai. I'm not sure if this is an answer or a question. Oh yeah, it's a question. If I recall save the mix from KLANG app and changing snapshots from Digico, does it still keep the settings safe? Well, those are two different things. So if we're using KLANG integrated into my Digico console, we're not using the show files in KLANG, because all the snapshots and all those settings would be managed directly from the Digico snapshots. What I'm talking about now is the standalone situation when I'm not working with an SD or Quantum. So for example, when I'm working with an S-series Digico console or with a completely different brand. So those are two different things. However, if you are working with Digico consoles and you're using the integration, you still should save a show file, because some of the routing and mapping functions are still stored on the device itself. But again, that's a topic for the Digico integration webinar, which we will repeat, I think, this week again. So let's see if there's anything else. Cameron is asking, does that built-in EQ affect the send to an individual mix or to the entire channel output to everyone? The EQ, the input EQ, is always for one device. So if I have one fabric, for example, setting the EQ for the kick drum would affect the kick drum for every mix in that device. That's very similar to how you would have it in a mixing board. So if I have my console and I adjust the EQ, that would be the same for all the auxes in there. And it behaves in the same way within KLANG. However, if you have cascaded, for example, two KLANG fabrics or two viers, or a fabric and a vier, or in whichever combination, you can have different EQs on each of those devices for all the mixes on the device that we're working on. Let's see if there's anything else. Lee, oh, that's just a compliment. That's why I pulled it up, because I like to feel well about myself. Lee, thank you very much for the nice words. Glad you like it. Paul Bell says, Wunderbar, I like it. A Scottish guy living in the US speaking German. Damn. 2020 is amazing. Except for, you know, the obvious mess that is going on around us. But as usual, we are trying to fill the time with interesting and useful things. And hopefully this is useful for you guys too. Again, let us know in the comments or send us a message if you have any wishes or feedback. There's a question from Ralph. If you are in personal mode, does the overview snapshot go always over it? Oh, okay. I think I know what you mean. I'm sorry, that took me a second. So you mean if we are in personal mode and we have a snapshot in there and somebody fires a global snapshot, that would affect your mix unless you recall save your mix. That's where this function comes in. So if you, you're a keyboarder. So in this case, you would recall save the keyboard mix, and then you're protected from the global snapshots. If you would assign your own snapshot in personal mode, that would automatically recall save your mix. So basically, that nothing can happen there. If you don't do that, then the last one firing basically is changing something. Eduardo is asking, is there a way to do binaural manipulation in real time? Yes, of course. That's what we're all about. So if you want to move your vocals around your head, you can do that. It's all in real time, of course. Absolutely. Giuseppe is asking, it's possible to create an offline session with KLANG app to send to KLANG device. No, not at this point. Yeah? Patience. Jonas. Oh, I know Jonas. Hey, good to see you. Is the connection of devices with brackets possible with more than 2 devices? Yes, it is. It is theoretically unlimited. We recommend to go to not more than 5 devices at once. If it goes more, it depends quite heavily on how your network is set up, if it might slow down the setup. But 5-6 units, there you're still totally fine. And that gives you quite a few mixes, actually. Eduardo, there was a question in the beginning like this, but let's say I'm in 3D mode and I have the kick back left on my head, and if I change to stereo, will it go to the left? Oh, I might have misunderstood that question before. Okay, so Eduardo, let me know if this is what you mean. So let's say I'm picking, let's say the guitar, right? And I'm moving it somewhere, okay? And I put it in the whole mix in stereo. That would collapse everything, yeah, in stereo in there. That would just bring it back there. However, if I go to stereo and I move it, then it would remain there, because the last movement basically decides where the signal would be in there. I hope that answers your question. Otherwise, usually you would use your finger anyway on your touchscreen, so you just move it to wherever you want to have it. All right, let's go back there. And by the way, Eduardo, so switching between 3D and stereo is probably not something that you would do during a show. So in this case, I don't think you would run into any issues with that. Cameron is asking, is it possible to cascade a DMI card and a vier? Unfortunately not. The DMI is not set up to work with a cascade. And it's pretty powerful already. I mean, it gives you 64 inputs with 16 mixes. You cannot cascade DMI. You can, however, cascade Fabric and vier. So Fabrics can be cascaded together, viers can be cascaded together, or a mix of both of them. But DMI, that's not possible. Okay, so Ricardo's asking, you show us how to increase mix with lower inputs and vice versa, but all those mixes are mono. Fabrics has only 8 mixes. No, mono is totally 2019. We don't do that. We're 2020. Just kidding. So no, when we talk about mixes, we always talk about stereo mixes, because we need stereo outputs, or 2 channels basically, in order to have the binaural processing encoded into the audio. So you can, of course, switch a channel to mono, but that would just output the same to both outputs that you're assigning it to. But when I'm talking about mixes, especially in Fabric, or when I'm saying that DMI KLANG has 16 mixes, we're talking about 16 stereo mixes. Absolutely. Ramonas asked the same question. I guess that's answered already. So Fabric and vier can be cascaded, DMI not. Will you be focusing only on digital console integration, or will you be covering generic console integration? That is a question that I cannot answer right now, because I just don't know the answer for that. As you might know or might not know, we are part of Digico. I think it's quite obvious that the Digico connection is always going to be the deepest. If there would be something with another brand at some point, that is, as you say, above my pay grade. So look up James Gordon and ask him. But even he will probably not answer that question. For now, we're focusing on Digico, because working with KLANG with different devices is still very easy and very good to do. Keep in mind that KLANG exists since quite a few years already, and the Digico integration only exists since a year around. So there were tons of productions out there without a Digico integration before that. And there are tons of clients that we have that are working with all kinds of consoles, be it Japanese, American, or whichever. Okay? So let's see if there's one more question. Eduardo, this 3D doesn't work like that when I change using Digico. Oh, yes, Eduardo, that behaves a little bit different because the control structure is a little bit different there. For that, I'm not sure if you were in the last webinar about the Digico integration. I would invite you to come into that because we will talk about all the details with that. But on the Digico, if I select one channel and turn it from 3D into stereo and then back into 3D, that actually would change the position because it would reset into a standard position. That is actually a normal behavior, but that is only when you're controlling it from the Digico. If you're controlling it on the app, that behaves differently, exactly like I showed you before. You has a question. Let me read that real quick. Great question. Okay, so if the musician has his mix recall saved and the engineer recalls a snapshot and then saves the snapshot with the console, will the console store new or old setting for that mix? It will store the current state. So if the musician fired his own snapshot or did not fire or recall saved it or whatever, and the engineer stores a global one, that would of course store the new information with that. So the recall saves are, as I think with pretty much any mixing board, recall saves. They're not save saves, they're recall saves. So everything is saved, but we can select what will be recalled from the information that is stored there. Okay, I think those were the questions. I'm not seeing any other ones. There were some very nice words and awesome. Thank you guys. I think we're gonna wrap it up. I tried my best to stay below an hour. I'm very sorry. It took us a little bit longer, but yeah, that was fun. That was really great. We had fantastic questions. Thank you very much to all you guys. In case I should have missed any questions in the comments, just write us a message afterwards. If you have any suggestions, ideas for other topics that you would like to have covered or that you would like to see more detail on next time, let us know. Keep an eye on our Facebook page. You will see announcement for further webinars. There's a plan for this week already. So we have tomorrow, Thursday and Friday, we have each a webinar. And then in the weeks after, we will continue to do that until we can finally get back out on the road. And then we will do probably some webinars, but then we will meet you face to face again in our hands-on training sessions all over the world. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you in our next webinar. Bye.